reveal. So, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know you haven't spoken yet in the session, but let's try it again. So, good morning. Good morning. We are going to have a dialogue here. We're going to look behind the four-letter code. And just to begin, and I'm afraid I'm still very old-fashioned, I like handouts. The handouts have been designed for you to follow along and write notes. They match the slides and don't completely contain everything on the slides to keep you active as learners. So, and this quote is on the page 2. You can't really have a continuing direction for your life until your best liked, most trusted, most preferred kind of perception, your best trusted, most liked and preferred kind of judgment have agreed on what is to be desired. So I really like that quote. So why did you sign up or decide to come to this session? Tell me why you wanted to come to this session.
To hear you.
I like you already.
Because you always stay away from your session. It's something you can actually use tomorrow.
Okay, so there's something you want to use, something, pick up something you can actually use tomorrow. Yes. How many of you are familiar with the cognitive processes? Or the what we call the Jungian function attitudes, what goes on behind the four-letter code?
Want to be more familiar.
Want to be more familiar. Thank you. Yes. So the objectives I put together for this very short 1.5-hour session are, I'm going to introduce you to some tools and techniques so that you can describe these 8 Jungian functions. Simple clues for recognizing each function. Just show you where the origins of the judging and perceiving preferences came from. And this is the optimistic bit, but you can do it afterwards if you like. Look at some of your strengths and challenges based on your primary information gathering and decision making function. And I'm not sure about the action plan, but I'm optimistic always. For those of you who are not familiar, I really focus on what we call whole type. So underneath the pattern of the four-letter code, there are 3 complementary models. Temperament is a separate yet complementary model. I'm not going to be talking about that one. I'm very disappointed because I would have liked to have listened to Catherine talk about the interaction styles model. Today we're going to look through the origins of the MBTI, which is what we call the Jungian function attitudes, or I like to call them cognitive processes. So what's our thinking style? What information do we naturally gravitate towards? And what criteria do we naturally use to make decisions? So that's really all the MBTI is about. So everyone familiar with the MBTI? That's the extroverting, introverting, obviously, sensing, intuiting. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. So the four-letter code is there, and it's also on the wall. If you can't read it very clearly, it's on page 3 if you want to go back to it on frequent occasions. So tell me, first of all, what do you understand by the term extroverting?
Out there.
Out there?
The way you get your energy from.
The way you get your energy from? Other definitions of extroverting or introverting?
Talking your thoughts.
Talking your thoughts. Now, in the research that we did, my daughter-in-law, she wasn't my daughter-in-law then, but is now, when we wrote the original book, Turning Teen Performance Inside Out, when she read about Jung, he talked about more the direction of energy versus the source of energy. So the direction of energy, does your energy naturally cycle out and then in, which will be extroverting preference, or does your energy cycle in first to reflect and think, and then out? Now, why do you think that might be a slightly easier definition for people to understand than source of energy? I think that might be easier to understand. Out to talk things through and in to reflect, or in to reflect and think things through and then talk?
It's greater parity, in a way.
Tell me more about that, Fiona.
Well, I think that, you know, is it an either or? I'm either this or I don't know. And often clients say, I don't know which I am.
That's right.
I'm both.
I'm both. Yeah, so when I draw this, often what I do is have, this is the external world, and this is the internal world. So for those with an extroverting preference, the energy goes like this, and then into the shadow side. And for those with an introverting preference, goes out, in, out, and then into the shadow side. And so what that helps to overcome is when people say, I'm both. That's exactly right. I do both. Yes, of course you do. In fact, we all need to do both, because if we only lived in the external world, we'd be manic and no one would want to be around us. If we only lived in the internal world, we'd be a hermit. So when I look at this, it's quite hard, I think, to identify this preference, which is why I like the interaction styles model in this framework. So I've given you some simple preferences on page 4. So in to reflect, and then out to act or talk things through, versus extroverting, out to talk things through and then in to reflect. May, and this is all conditional language, may think first and then act, may act first and then think, may listen more than talk, may be more reserved body language. And the key thing is that the direction of your energy influences what we call your dominant function. So you use your dominant or your hero function in your preferred world. So if you have an extroverting preference, your dominant function is out in the external world. And I'll come back to this later. If you have an introverting preference, your dominant function is in the internal world. And so what we see in the external world is your auxiliary or your supportive parent. So, and the reason I like this is that the interaction styles model is, once people identify if they have a behind-the-scenes interaction style or a chart of course, that is associated with an introverting preference. If they identify with get things going or in charge, that normally means they have an extroverting preference. So actually getting people to self-select their interaction style energy is often a more effective way of people self-assessing whether they have an extroverting or an introverting preference. And some of those stereotypes about, oh, extroverts always talk, and they're gregarious, that doesn't work for the in-charge extrovert. When there's other stuff going on, they will plow straight through and won't do the social chit-chat. So some of those stereotypes, this helps to get around some of those stereotypes. So thoughts or comments about extroverting or introverting as a preference? As I say, I wish it would be nice to have done this one and then gone to Catherine. Jenny?
Just that beautiful bit of when people say, but I do both, the response is, good.
Good!
And really emphasizing that. We're just trying to figure out, the pattern in which you do it.
That's right. The pattern and the hierarchy of functions in which you might naturally operate and the energy you might naturally bring. So any other thoughts or comments on this? As I say, this is a whistle-stop tour through this model. So let's come back to the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So Jung introduced the concepts of extroversion and introversion. And as we've seen in several presentations, he also talked about the Jungian function attitude. So these are the central two, what we call preferences under the MBTI or dichotomies. So sensing and intuiting and thinking and feeling. And Jung actually, as you know, described two versions of sensing, two versions of intuiting, two versions of thinking, and two versions of feeling. And the technical names, which was difficult for me watching Insights yesterday, is extroverted sensing, which is S with a little e. When it's written ES, it confuses people because that could work for ESTJ, and that is not extroverted sensing. S with a little e is extroverted sensing. S with a little I is introverted sensing. N with a little e is extroverted intuiting. You can see the theme, right? And all those years ago, I think this was in about 1990, I didn't write the original, 95 or 6, I came across the Jungian function attitudes. And as I do have an extroverting preference, and I do tend to talk through my models out loud. Again. It's obviously my better half, Derek. Better half, 40 years last 2 weeks ago. So 40 years. I was sitting up in bed on a Saturday morning. This is in America, so this was with hot tea with milk. And sugar, none of this cold iced tea rubbish, you know, you drink tea hot with milk after it's been in a teapot. Anyway, there we were talking and we were saying, well, Derek, there's these things, you see, you use introverted sensing and I use introverted intuiting, and that's really different because you tend to go to the past, I go to the future. And then we both use extroverted feeling, and he's like, says, what on earth are you talking about? And I said, well, there's these functions that demonstrate how we gather information and make decisions. And he said, is there a simple word that you can give me that would capture the essence of the function so I could understand what you were talking about? What an innovative idea, really. Let's make it comprehensible to the audience. So I came up with a few phone calls later, a name for each of the functions. Now, it does not capture the full complexity of the function. What it does, though, it gives people an anchor to hold on to. So at least a word is worth more than a letter, 2 letters together, because I use extroverted sensing, but I'm an introvert, and I use introverted sensing, but I'm an extrovert. I mean, people get really confused. So the words we came up with were experiencing, recalling, brainstorming, and visioning for the information gathering or perceiving functions, systematizing, analyzing, harmonizing, and valuing for the decision-making functions. We use all 8 functions. It's just what pattern do they represent? How easy are they for us to access? So what are these cognitive processes? They were defined by Carl Jung. This is in your materials, for Jung, perceiving, for judging. The 4 information gathering functions are the perceiving functions, and this is at the top of page 5. So gathering information or perceiving, and the decision-making functions pertain to what criteria do we naturally use to make decisions, 4 of each. We use all 8 functions, however we have 2 preferred functions, as Marquis talked about yesterday, our hero or our leading function, and our auxiliary or our supportive parent. And those 2 seem to be easiest for us to access. We can access some of the others, but they're not as easy for us to access. And the MBTI was designed to assess which functions do we use in which sequence. So what I'd like you to do, I know most people do this with the MBTI, it's much better with functions though. In the space, in the upper box with the hand you normally write with, can you sign your name as though you were signing a check or a credit card? Now switch to the other hand and duplicate the signature. All right, now have a look at your neighbour. I was going to say to you.
Well, that's not bad.
Yours is more legible than the wrong one. Okay. That's a
Right, yes, because I don't.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Is this right?
This wouldn't work with GPs, would it?
No, not really.
So what was the difference between writing with our preferred hand and writing with our non-preferred hand?
Slow.
Slower with your non-preferred, yes. It was like, the first one was chunk chunk and the second was long. Yeah, what else?
Very close.
You really had to concentrate when you were writing with your other hand, so it took more conscious effort. Good. What else?
It's very immature and undeveloped.
Very immature and undeveloped. You know, normally the quality is not as high. Good. What else?
But because we weren't controlled, it was quite intriguing. So I wondered where it would go because I wasn't in control.
Oh, intriguing. You weren't in control. You weren't sure where it would go.
I knew it wouldn't turn out, so I didn't care and just rushed it.
Yeah, didn't care, so you just rushed it. Yes.
I had to think about how I created the one above.
Yes. How did you create the one above? So this, I think, is a great example of what the difference is between using a preferred process and a non-preferred process. When you're using a preferred process, it is like writing with your preferred hand. Easy, quick, you don't have to think about it. The quality is normally pretty good, and it's effortless. I mean, I don't know Latin. All I remember John Beebe saying that the word function comes from the Latin fungare, which means ease. Does anybody know Latin? Oh, good, well, I'll bluff it through then and say that's what. And that's what the function is about, ease of use. When we use some of these non-preferred functions, they take more conscious thought, they take longer, they take more energy from us. And so we'll often feel it in our body when we're having to use some of those functions that are low down, because you'll sort of feel, oh gosh, this doesn't feel very easy for me. I mean, certainly when I have to use my demonic five, extroverted thinking, I feel consciously slower and tripping over things. I mean, the whole time difference stuff when we're trying to organize calls and then they change the clock, so the clocks spring forward in America but not here. I'm like, oh, what time is it in American? That's extroverted thinking. Now, someone with extroverted thinking as a dominant view, something like, it's changed, not even thinking about it. So what I'd like to do is guide you through an exploration of each of these 8 cognitive processes. I'm going to introduce a small activity with each one. Normally I do 2 or 3 activities with each cognitive processes, and it normally takes about 3 or 4 hours. We've also got some cards associated with both temperament and interaction style and cognitive processes. And they've got symbols on them. Now, what's the advantage of using symbols to communicate messages rather than just words?
It's good visual recall for those who need that.
Yeah, good visual recall.
You don't have to spend a lot when you go to translate them into different languages.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea. That's a good thought for you. Yes, so when you look at, and feel free, there should be a pack of cards in front of you. These were the original cards that are lighter weight. So if you want to actually get out the cognitive processes cards, you can, to see these signals. I should let you get out of it. So it should be a set in front of you. Miss the first 4, because the first 4 are temperaments. Miss the second 4, because they're interaction styles. We're going to be starting with these. So the next 8, we're starting with the experiencing. So if you want, you can take those out, and that's a visual cue for you to use. And the next, do you want a set each? These were the first draft, and they're lighter weight than the actual card, so we use these for activities now. So, everyone got a set? So tell me what the signals then for E and I mean to you, just so that, to do a quick review. What do those, does that symbol show? Energy going out, energy coming in. So that's the direction of energy. What do you understand by the magnifying glass? The sensing?
Observing.
Observing. Attention to detail. More sort of concrete, looking at some of the detail. We'll look at that with extrovert sensing. And the light bulb? Ideas. Possibility. Inspiration, possibilities. Good. What about the scales for thinking? Making judgments. Risk analysis, objective analysis, very nice. I'm not quite sure of the heart, but all those
Values.
Values. Thank you. What else do you understand by the heart? Emotions, and that can be the risk. And Sue Blair came up with these visuals originally, and she said, actually the visual you use doesn't matter, it's the language combined with the visual that enhances the learning. And what do you see for the judging preference? What do you see from that symbol? Closure. Yes, yes. Substructions of closure. And for perceiving?
Options.
Possibilities and open-ended, yes. I really do want to get to explain the judging and perceiving preference at the end of the MBTI, because that's often one of the most misunderstood elements of the instrument. So why do you think we use cards? So in your table groups, just for 2 or 3 minutes, why do you think we use cards to help us explain these concepts? So Pauline and...
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me give you just 2 minutes. Why cards? Talk to each other. Why do you think we want to use cards as a teaching tool? Yes.
Even if people are fairly aware, it takes the cognitive load off your brain because the paper's holding it and you can go into your conversation.
Yes. Is there something about opinion that's true?
That's right. It's a visual thing, isn't it, rather than just...
And also it splits it up so
Especially for you can actually, for those of us who like to control what's going on in exercising, it provides that. So, not that we would do that.
Never.
I wish we had a film of the two of us charting the course in charge in Paris when they started playing.
Sorry, yes.
So I was standing at the back of the room like this while Susan walking around. Sorry.
Yes, but very much more preferred.
Yeah, I mean, my tuition, it's the more psychological bit, but I use photography and that helps.
So tell me, what were some of the reasons to use cards, did you think?
And yet, there is no creativity without.
Why did we say, why
Brainstorming
use
doesn't work
cards?
without
What were some of your thoughts?
Whether you like it or not.
Concentrate on that one thing, it's not lost on
If you want to.
Thank you, you can concentrate on the one thing. Come on. You were explaining why to use cards.
We were just saying, she was saying, you know, if it's here, then it's constraining.
Yeah.
And yet actually for good brainstorming and activity, there have to be some constraints. That's what the research shows.
Yeah, so that you have something, but you can move them around as well. Yeah, good. What else? Why else do we use cards?
The symbol is a sort of artifact that holds and distills a lot of complexity, but it holds it in a quite a simple way, so you can bring your experience to it.
Holds and distills complexity in a simple way. I had to repeat that, it's so good. Good. Other reasons to use cards?
Well, perhaps when there's a lack of clarity about type, it's so clear if you can compare them and see which is you, perhaps, or which
Yeah, when you can see and then you can compare them. Yeah, so and I got into cards. I met Sue Blair at the Dallas conference. I was running a pre-conference workshop on coaching, and as a beautiful example of someone with preferences for ESTJ, of course, Sue was there 45 minutes early, bright eyes and bushy tails from my session. So of course she ended up helping me. We ended up spending the whole conference pretty much hanging out together. And she, with preferences for ESTJ, sees that practical side. So she had developed a personality puzzle, and when she was exposed to temperament and interaction style, cognitive process, she said, we've got to do some cards on these. So we have collaborated on these cards, and her type preferences are ESTJ is the diametric opposite of mine. So her 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are my 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it works beautifully, us working together. We both have the in-charge style, so we're perfectly happy pushing each other around, so I think it's good. Why cards? Nowadays they're novelty value. You know, we're all so much on screens that we forget that we're tactile human beings. They're interactive and game-like. Think of growing up, most of us were playing cards. They do appeal to all types. And certainly in activities, they are a fantastic tool for all temperaments. Flexible, heavy. Combine visual images and language, so that also helps with the learning. They make the complex simple to understand, which is paraphrasing what you said. Appeal to all ages, even Gen Y. You know, we think, oh, they're the video games. They love cards. Love cards. I mean, you do a lot of work in schools, and cards are there. They are portable. As I say, these happen to be heavy, but they are portable. And they're technology independent, so you could anywhere. And I've more and more been using these cards in workshops, and people love them. You know, they really get to grips with content in a way that otherwise I wouldn't see. So, they are economical if you can figure out a way to organize them. I have about 3 boxes full of cards for activities at the moment I'm having to work out. So we're going to use these cards as we define each of the cognitive processes. So any questions before we jump into defining the cognitive processes? So I'm going to start with extroverted sensing or experiencing. And experiencing is about being tuned in to the physical here and now. Sight, smell, touch, taste, and being drawn to act on the physical universe. And I just want to build this table as we go. It's not in your materials. Which types does anyone know which types use this as a dominant function?
ESFP.
Yes, thank you. So it's ESTP and ESFP, or as an auxiliary, ISTP and ISFP. And the temperament that primarily uses this cognitive process is, do you know which temperament primarily uses this? SPs. Or as it's a separate theory, and by using the preference letters, we make the assumption that it's the same theory. I tend to like to use the name, so either artisan or improviser, whichever. So we're just going to try on extroverted sensing for a minute, or experiencing. So what I want you to do is look around the room and look and see something that physically appeals to you, and I want you to get up and move and touch it. And just stay where you are, touching and experiencing something. You have to, something that's attractive to you, get up, move, touch to it. So for instance. We're all like anything you like. For instance, I think this. Wow, what a beautiful scar. And when you get to that thing that distracts you, I want you to experience it. Touch it, smell it, feel it. Put it through all your sensory perception. That's why I try to have as much stuff as I could.
I was expecting to be grabbed from behind.
Sure who this belongs to. Now, does anyone have this function as a dominant process? Do we have any ESFPs or ESTPs in the room? What a shame, because if we did, we would certainly get another insight. So grab a seat. Thank you for doing that. Now, how did it feel doing that? Trying to get up and move.
Indulgent.
Indulgent? Tell me what you mean by indulgent.
It's my tertiary function. I'm just going through midlife. And it's playful.
Playful. Yes, it's playful. So for me, my tertiary is the same as you, extroverted sensing, so I see it in the dancing, which I don't do anymore, so it's the inch of my hand. And walking and exercising, that's my playful listening to music, going to shows. So did you hear when I gave you that instruction, what happened immediately? Were you aware of what was going on in the room? There was a sort of a pause, and there was a, oh.